Last month, I sat in a high-end bistro in the city, watching a senior policy advisor celebrate his department's latest report on economic resilience. He was glowing, practically radiating this sense of mission accomplished. He kept pointing to a chart on his tablet showing the stabilization of the currency, calling it a masterpiece of modern management.
So to him, the numbers look good. The job was done.
The job was done. The economy had finally been tamed. But then the waiter arrived. A young man I actually recognized, a former mechanical engineer. He'd been laid off when his firm just couldn't keep up with the new energy transition levies.
Wow.
And the advisor, he didn't notice the irony at all. He ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than the waiter's weekly take-home pay, all while complaining that finding good help was the only remaining friction in an otherwise perfect system.
That is just a perfect, if painful, little story.
It really is. And what struck me wasn't just the inequality, but the total disconnect in their languages. The advisor saw structural adjustment, while the man serving him, well, he saw his life's work being erased by a hidden tax he couldn't even name.
Two completely different realities in the same room.
It was a perfect, quiet snapshot of 2026. A world where the people running the engine have stopped looking at the gauges, and the people in the back are just now realizing the doors have been locked from the outside. We're told we're living through an era of ordered chaos, a necessary transition to a greener, more stable world. But when you strip away the vocabulary of the management class, you find something much, much darker. It's not an economic cycle, it's a pathology.
Yes.
It's a world where the state has stopped protecting the value of your time and started treating it as a resource to be mined. And to understand how we got here, we have to look at how the very definition of money was quietly replaced by the needs of power, and why your resilience is actually their greatest achievement in theft.
That is a stark anecdote. And it perfectly encapsulates the cognitive dissonance that defines this moment we're in.
Right.
The perception of triumph for a powerful elite, that policy advisor celebrating stabilization, it translates directly into a systemic breach of the social contract for almost everyone else, like that engineer waiting tables.
A breach of the social contract. I like that phrasing.
And that's our mission today, I think, to move beyond these, abstract terms like economic cycle and really diagnose this pathology. We need to investigate the deep structural mechanisms and, frankly, the institutional rot that have made this period of managed decline not just possible, but, well, arguably necessary for those outside the inner circles of power.
Okay, so let's unpack this. For this deep dive, we're looking at sources that suggest this isn't just a series of bad policy choices. It's more like a deliberate blueprint for how society is being restructured, kind of beneath the surface.
A fundamental shift.
We've organized our exploration into three core areas. First, we have to get a handle on the underlying economic architecture. How do things like fiscal dominance and currency devaluation systematically redistribute middle-class wealth? We're calling this the quiet theft.
The plumbing of the system.
Exactly. Second, we'll look at the social and institutional mechanism, how the collapse of meritocracy and a real crisis in competence are making Western systems fatally fragile. We're diagnosing this as the structural decay.
The people and the ideas running that plumbing.
Right. And then finally, we'll examine the resulting system itself, the transition from what we all thought of as free market capitalism to a rent-seeking, almost neo-feudal structure.
Well,
this is the managed decline.
Let's get into it.
Let's start with the economics, because this really is where the theft begins, quietly, systemically, through the money itself. The core idea here is that the state has sort of replaced the historic definition of sound money with one that just serves the immediate needs of political power. So the question is, how does this systematic wealth redistribution actually happen? I mean, no one is signing a check over to anyone.
No, it's much more subtle than that. And we have to start with the fundamental shift in economic policy regimes. We need to distinguish between what used to be the goal, monetary dominance, and what we're operating under now, which is fiscal dominance.
Okay, break those down. What's monetary dominance?
Monetary dominance is the textbook ideal you were taught in school. It's where the central bank's singular strict focus is on price stability, on controlling inflation. That's job 1, 2, and 3.
And the government's role in that world?
In that scenario, the government, the fiscal arm, has to play by the central bank's rules. It has to adjust its spending or raise taxes to make sure its debt is sustainable. It cannot interfere with the central bank's fight against inflation. The government has to tighten its belt.
That sounds like a system that's actually designed to protect the value of my savings, of my time.
It is, or at least it's supposed to be. Now, fiscal dominance is the complete inversion of that ideal. Here, the government's immense fiscal pressures, we're talking high public debt, persistent structural deficits, they become so large they overwhelm and effectively dictate monetary policy.
So the government's needs come first.
The government's needs come first. The central bank's mandate to control inflation becomes completely secondary. It becomes subservient to the Treasury's desperate need for budget financing. And this, well, it compels the central bank to accommodate government borrowing.
Wait, accommodate? Is that just a polite way of saying the central bank is forced to print money to buy the government's debt?
It is, essentially, yes. They accommodate by keeping interest rates artificially low so the government's debt service payments remain manageable, or, and this is the crucial part, by directly purchasing massive amounts of government debt. It's a process known as debt monetization or seigniorage.
So they're just creating money out of thin air to pay the government's bills.
As economists like Sargent and Wallace noted decades ago, if a government's fiscal policy is unsustainable, it will inevitably force the monetary authority to generate revenue through money printing. It completely compromises any inflation target they might have.
Okay, this leads to the fundamental question then. When government debt is truly astronomical as it is now, why can't central banks just raise rates aggressively to stop inflation? Isn't that the established cure, the old playbook?
And this is where the paradox of fiscal dominance becomes so visible, and it's absolutely crucial to understand this. Under high fiscal dominance, raising interest rates can paradoxically contribute to inflation rather than curing it.
How does that even work?
Well, think about it. When a government is carrying, say, 120% of its GDP in debt, every single percentage point increase in interest rates means tens or even hundreds of billions of dollars more must be paid out annually just to service that debt.
So the government is paying out these huge sums of interest.
Yeah.
Okay, and who receives that interest? Where does that money go?
Exactly. That's the question. Those massive interest payments flow predominantly to banks, to large institutional pension funds, and to wealthy investors who hold the government bonds. This flood of interest income acts as a powerful inflationary economic stimulus.
So it's basically the government injecting massive amounts of spending power right back into the system.
You've got it. The central bank tries to cool demand by raising rates, but the Treasury completely counters that effort by injecting vast sums back into the financial system through these interest payments. If the government's structural deficit remains high, the central bank's attempt to cool inflation inadvertently just sustains it.
It's like trying to put out a fire by spraying it with a hose full of gasoline.
That's a perfect analogy, and it reveals the truth. The central bank's decisions aren't really about stabilizing the cost of living for the public anymore. They're about maintaining the solvency of the state and the liquidity of the financial system.
And this mechanism, this influx of new money to service the debt, this is precisely where the Cantillon effect comes into play.
Yes. Richard Cantillon, writing way back in the 1730s, gave us the blueprint for this unequal distribution of newly created money. His core insight was brilliantly simple. When new money is injected, it doesn't just, diffuse uniformly or instantly across the entire economy.
It's not like a dye dropped in water.
Not at all. It travels sequentially, and the people who receive it first gain a massive, massive advantage.
Let's use his original example to sort of anchor this idea before we jump to 2026. What was the story with the silver mines?
So Cantillon used the example of new money coming from, say, newly discovered silver mines. The mine owners and the miners are the first to get this new money. And what do? They don't just buy more of everything. They buy higher value goods, let's say more meat, more expensive wine.
Okay, so that drives up the prices of meat and wine first.
Right. And then the farmers, seeing this new demand, respond. They start shifting production, they take land away from growing grain for bread and beer, and they switch it to raising cattle or planting vineyards to meet the demand from the miners.
So the mine owners and the early spenders benefit hugely, but the regular peasant who relies on the staples,
they are structurally hurt. The peasant, whose wage hasn't changed at all, now faces much higher relative prices for their necessities, like grain, because the supply has shrunk. The wealth is redistributed not through any kind of direct tax, but through the changing structure of the real economy and who gets the new money first. You have real winners and real losers.
Okay, so let's map that chain of injection to the modern financial world. The sequence today is what? Central banks running these massive bond buying programs.
Yes, funneling money to primary dealers and the big private banks,
who then pass it to Wall Street and massive asset owners.
And then finally, diluted by all the inflation it caused along the way, it trickles down to the regular folks.
that mapping, it just perfectly reveals the modern Cantillon arbitrage opportunity.
It does. The early recipients, the large financial institutions, the asset managers, they get to spend that new money before general consumer prices fully reflect the inflation. They acquire goods, sure, but more importantly, they acquire finite assets.
Real estate stocks.
Real estate stocks, private equity. They buy them at a massive discount relative to their future inflated price. They are essentially front-running the inflation they know is coming. They lock in wealth.
And the average person only sees the final result. Their rent is higher, their groceries cost more, and they have to work longer and longer for the same purchasing power.
And that's the truth behind what the sources are calling the institutionalized theft of labor value. Inflation is deliberately used as a systemic tool for redistribution.
Why? I mean, why not just be honest about it?
Because raising income or property taxes is politically explosive. It invites an immediate public backlash. Currency devaluation, however, that's the invisible tax, it systematically dilutes middle-class savings without ever requiring a single vote in Congress.
The numbers you cited earlier are just startling. M2 money supply expansion of 40 to 60% across major economies in just a few years, while median wages either stagnated or actually declined. That doesn't look like economic mismanagement.
No, that looks like a purposeful wealth transfer mechanism.
It's the inevitable design outcome of prioritizing the government's fiscal needs above all else.
It is. And this is why the sources identify the concept of lifetime theft. If you spend decades of your life accumulating savings based on the expectation of a stable currency, and then the value of that currency is structurally diluted by the system's need to service massive sovereign debt, well, the value of your accumulated time, your labor, has been stolen from you.
Is there a simple way we can quantify that theft to make it less abstract?
We can. We can measure labor value against something scarce, something that can't be printed into oblivion. Let's use gold. If we measure it against gold, the number of hours a typical engineer had to work to buy a single ounce of gold rose by 47% in just the last 3 years.
What?
The productivity and effort of that engineer remained constant, or maybe even increased. But the monetary return on that effort was diluted by nearly half. Their labor was devalued by the system to serve the financial needs of the state and the financial class.
And this structural dilution, it favors a protected few, creating what our sources are calling the certainty premium. What is that?
The certainty premium is the shield that's offered only to those closest to power. This includes the, bureaucratic capitalist enterprises that benefit from massive guaranteed government contracts or green subsidies or regulatory waivers. They operate with a very high degree of certainty.
While everyone else is left to fend for themselves.
Everyone else, the ordinary worker, the small business owner, they are forced to bear the uncertainty risk. They face unpredictable currency value evaporation, sudden regulatory tightening, and policy shifts that can just erase years of careful planning. They have no certainty about the future purchasing power of their accumulated labor.
It sounds so theoretical, but then you see the crushing human cost when you look at individual stories. Let's talk about Evelyn, the senior physical therapist. Her story, to me, is the perfect counterpoint to that policy advisor's charts.
Evelyn's situation is the real-world evidence of the Cantillon effect in action. She represents an entire demographic that followed every single rule.
Right.
She worked hard as a physical therapist for 25 years, saved diligently, built up what she called her freedom fund. In nominal terms, her bank account grew and grew. She expected to buy a modest little cottage in the Cotswolds for her retirement.
But the policy advisor's charts showing stabilization meant something entirely different for Evelyn's reality.
Entirely different. While her nominal savings were growing, the modest cottage she wanted tripled in price. And that wasn't organic market growth. It was driven by institutional investors, flush with new money, fresh from the central bank's latest liquidity injections, who were outbidding her. Her savings arrived late in the Cantillon chain.
So her decades of painstaking labor were devalued in real time.
They were effectively transferred to the asset holding class. The government didn't raise her taxes, but the central bank's policies silently transferred her retirement wealth away from her.
When you realize that the promise work hard, save wisely, and you will achieve security is being broken not accidentally, but through the deliberate design of currency devaluation, you start looking for an exit.
And that leads directly to the growing interest in alternatives, what some are calling the reverse Cantillon effect. The argument for hard, scarce assets like gold, or in the modern context, Bitcoin, is that they offer a form of systemic insurance.
How does that reverse the effect, though?
Because these assets have a fixed, or at least a hard-capped supply, the government simply cannot print more of them. So while the fiat money supply expands exponentially to service sovereign debt and finance deficits, which pushes up asset prices generally, holding a scarce asset allows your savings to outpace that rate of monetary inflation.
So you're essentially leveraging scarcity to opt out of the system.
You are opting out of the systematic unfairness of a fiat system that continually penalizes those furthest from the money printer.
That brings us to our second core theme, the structural decay of the institutions themselves. We've established the economic mechanism, the theft of value. Now we need to shift to the people running the engineers, the doctors, the bureaucrats.
Right.
This connects right back to the engineer serving wine in the opening anecdote. He was laid off due to energy transition levies. The sources suggest that our high-stakes systems are failing because they are systematically filtering for ideological compliance over objective performance.
And to understand why our institutions are, well, rotting from within, we have to start by dismantling the one word we all hold up as an ultimate good: meritocracy.
You're referring to its highly unusual, even dark origins.
I am. Most people use meritocracy to mean fairness, right? Based purely on talent and effort. But the term was actually coined in 1958 by Michael Young in his satirical essay, The Rise of the Meritocracy.
It was satire.
It was profound satire. He wrote it as a warning, a forecast of a chilling high-tech dystopia. He defined merit as IQ plus effort, but he warned that elevating a supposedly superior elite based solely on these metrics would breed two specific societal toxins that would ultimately destroy social stability.
What were Young's two predicted ills of a functioning meritocracy?
First, he predicted meritocratic hubris. The successful elite would become utterly consumed by arrogance. They'd believe they had earned their status purely through their own moral desert.
So they wouldn't just see themselves as successful, but as inherently superior.
Exactly. As superior individuals whose vast wealth and power were a direct reflection of their moral worth and hard work alone, they would completely deny the role of luck or circumstance.
And the devastating second ill, the one concerning those who failed.
Young called this the internalized failure of the underclass. In a true meritocracy, if you're labeled a dunce or a failure, you can no longer blame the system or inherited privilege or fate as you could in an aristocracy.
You can only blame yourself.
You can only blame yourself. This internalization of failure as a personal moral lack leads to deep societal demoralization and a profound sense of injustice. It makes the social divide much, much harder to bridge.
Wow. It sounds like the system promises equality of opportunity, but ultimately creates a moral justification for inequality that's actually crueler than any aristocracy. But philosophically, why is the elite's claim to their rewards so weak?
It all rests on fundamental luck, which completely challenges the whole idea of a self-made success. Political philosophy raises two really powerful objections. The first is the contingency of talent.
Meaning?
Meaning you didn't earn your raw talent. Think about LeBron James. He earned his rewards through immense effort and training, of course, but he didn't earn the specific genetic and physical talents that made all that effort so valuable in professional basketball. He was just lucky to be born with those specific advantageous genetics.
So you earned the rewards, but you didn't earn the ability to earn the rewards. It's a gift of nature, and clinging to the moral high ground based on that gift is, well, it's hubris. What's the second objection?
The second is the moral arbitrariness of market demand. Success relies entirely on the cosmic luck of living in a time and place that happens to value your specific talent handsomely. Imagine a brilliant software architect today earning millions.
Yeah.
Now, transport that same person with the exact same brain power back to the 17th century. They would have negligible social status because that era just did not yet value complex, abstract coding.
That's fascinating. Their talent didn't change at all, but society's need for it, the market demand did, and that drastically altered their social power. So elite success is, as the sources suggest, luck multiplied by luck.
And yet they cling desperately to the moral justification. They weaponize economic difference into a personal moral failing. That's a philosophical underpinning that allowed the great inequality gap caused by financialization and globalization to expand. The winners needed to tell themselves and everyone else that they deserved it because they were morally and intellectually superior.
Okay, so that philosophy created the hubris. But how does that hubris translate into an actual mechanism of decay inside our institutions? You refer to this as the bureaucratic siege.
It's the systemic capture of our core institutions. universities, hospitals, engineering firms, by an expanding administrative bureaucracy. We see data showing that the growth of administrative staff, particularly those focused on process, social compliance, and regulatory metrics.
The HR department, compliance offices.
Exactly. Their growth far, far outpaces the growth of the technical or operational staff, the people actually doing the core mission of the institution.
And so the people whose primary job is to manage the process begin to control the entire organization's mission. Process becomes the product.
Precisely. And the power of this administrative class is based on risk management and compliance, not competence in the core mission. This leads directly to the tyranny of the mediocre. When hiring and promotion filters are controlled by compliance metrics, objective excellence becomes secondary to managing social and ideological risk.
The system stops screening for the best engineers or doctors or professors.
And it starts filtering ruthlessly for the most compliant ones.
And what does that do to the existing high-level talent that's already in the system?
Well, mediocre leadership, which has risen through this compliance-focused administrative track, harbors a systemic, deep fear of truly superior talent.
Why? You'd think they'd want the best people.
Because true rigor and competence expose their own mediocrity. It's a threat. So to secure their own position, they instinctively purge rigorous talent, either by making the work environment unbearable or by firing them using performance reviews based on these abstract social metrics.
It's a downward spiral that systematically cleanses capability.
It depletes the crucial competence reserve.
Let's define that reserve clearly. Why is its depletion so catastrophic?
The competence reserve is the deep, non-codified reservoir of experience, institutional memory, and rigor that complex, high-risk systems rely on when automation fails, or the unforeseen occurs. It's the senior pilot who knows how to fly the plane when the computers glitch.
It's the veteran mechanic who recognizes the silent language of a broken machine.
It's the seasoned doctor who makes the correct diagnosis based on an instinct refined over decades. Complex systems operate on a very narrow margin of safety. When you systematically filter out the most rigorous, technically astute, and least ideologically compliant individuals, you are shrinking that margin to almost nothing. The system looks stable, right up until the moment of crisis.
And we have some concrete, frankly chilling examples of the cost of this shift in critical infrastructure. Tell me about the aviation anecdote involving a mechanic named Miller. That sounds like a situation where objective reality clashed directly with institutional compliance metrics.
It is a textbook case of what you could call organizational inversion. So imagine Miller, a senior lead mechanic with decades of specialized hands-on experience at a major airline. He is the competence reserve. He's overseeing a critical maintenance task involving a new recruit hired under a highly visible fast-track demographic initiative aimed at meeting certain social metrics.
And the recruit, under pressure, makes a fundamental technical mistake.
A potentially catastrophic one. The recruit over-tightens the bolts on a critical hydraulic pump housing, stripping the threading. This is a major safety breach that risks mid-flight failure. Fearing reprisal, the recruit just silently seals the panel, hoping the mistake goes unnoticed. But Miller, using his decades of ingrained vigilance, he detects an almost imperceptible misalignment, opens the panel, finds the stripped threading, corrects the fault, and then confronts the recruit sharply on the ethical and professional violation of sealing up a known safety fault.
Okay, so Miller just saved potentially hundreds of lives. What was the organization's immediate response?
Miller was immediately summoned to human resources.
You're kidding.
The focus of the meeting was not the pump, not the integrity of the aircraft, not the ethical breach of the junior mechanic. The entire interrogation centered on Miller's tone, his language, and whether he created a hostile work environment for the new hire who felt singled out.
That's insane. The organization prioritized ideological optics and employee comfort over objective safety standards.
The organization prioritized compliance over competence. Miller was reprimanded, took early retirement 3 months later, and the airline lost 30 years of irreplaceable vigilance. The structural decay is that the system rewards the person who reports the microaggression and punishes the person who saves the plane. The competence reserve shrinks dangerously because the structure is designed to protect itself, not the core mission.
And this clash between competence and compliance shows up just as dramatically in medicine, doesn't it? Where the bedrock of success has to be objective biological truth. You mentioned the grand rounds anecdote.
Yes, this was an account from a resident describing a high-stakes case presentation. The patient's symptoms pointed unmistakably to a condition that is biologically sex-specific. The attending physician asked the highly trained residents for the differential diagnosis, and the room of sharp, capable young doctors fell silent.
Why? They must have known the clinical facts.
Oh, they did. But they were paralyzed by fear. They were terrified that stating the necessary biological fact, which was critical for an accurate diagnosis, would be interpreted as an ideological transgression, a violation of social policy, or a microaggression.
So the fear of HR outweighed the duty to the patient.
The sources describe it as the fear of ideological discipline outweighing the primary professional duty of accurate clinical assessment. If a highly trained medical professional cannot state an objective, immutable biological fact necessary for diagnosis because they fear the HR department more than malpractice, the patient loses. Competence is compromised by self-censorship, enforced by a compliance culture.
The ultimate non-negotiable check on this systemic decay, though, regardless of policy or compliance, is what the sources call reality's veto.
Yes.
Ideology cannot suspend the laws of physics or biology.
And this is nowhere clearer than in critical infrastructure, like the power grid. Consider a control room during a severe heat wave. The veteran engineer has been replaced by a politically savvy chief engineer selected primarily for their ESG alignment and administrative skills. The grid is near collapse. The necessary action to prevent a catastrophic, widespread system failure is a controlled, politically unpopular rolling blackout.
But the new chief engineer, focused on political optics, delays that decision. They think they can manage the situation without incurring public outrage. They're substituting social engineering fantasy for the physics of the grid.
And that delay is lethal. The system trips catastrophically. It's not a managed blackout. It's a cascading failure that affects millions, all because the necessary objective action was delayed by political calculation. Reality always gets the final vote. When technical authority is decoupled from objective competence and replaced by ideological compliance, the essential infrastructure becomes fatally fragile.
The system fails because the human in charge prioritized the wrong set of metrics. And this structural decay is amplified by policy mandates, like the green transition levies, which circles us right back to the waiter engineer in the introduction. The sources feature a powerful anecdote about Klaus, an engineer in Germany's Ruhr Valley.
Klaus's experience really encapsulates this collision. He was a master engineer, representing a century of precision and technical excellence. His plant was forced to close down a highly efficient turbine line to meet green transition mandates that were, by his and his design team's objective analysis, technologically impossible to achieve within the specified time frame.
But instead of promoting the objective truth, the firm promoted the advocate.
Exactly. They overlooked the lead designers who flagged the risks and instead promoted a sustainability coordinator who had zero engineering background but perfect ideological alignment. Klaus spoke about the sheer frustration of watching a localized blackout occur that everyone with the technical background saw coming, but no one was authorized to stop because the authority rested with the politically compliant coordinator.
So it's the structural sacrifice of technical merit for political optics.
And it accelerates the decline of industrial civilization by actively eroding technical knowledge and problem-solving ability in favor of managed compliance.
Okay, so we've diagnosed the pathology on two levels. The economic architecture is geared toward the quiet theft, and the institutional filtering mechanism promotes the structural decay. If we synthesize these two forces, what do we get?
We get the resulting economic system. We arrive at the transition away from free market capitalism and toward a state of managed decline, which is defined by neo-feudalism.
So this isn't simply a phase of capitalism, it's a fundamental transformation where the rules of the game have completely changed. The old laws of motion competition, accumulation via productive innovation, profit maximization, they're folding in on themselves.
That's the key distinction. The system still accumulates wealth, but the strategy is extraction, not production. Since the 1970s, many analysts point to a secular stagnation and a declining rate of profit. This means the incentive structure for highly productive entrepreneurial accumulation has waned. The new strategy is accumulation via rent-seeking, plunder, and political control strategies that are typical of pre-modern feudal structures.
Let's detail these modern neo-feudal mechanisms, starting with rentier capitalism. You cited Piketty's observation that wealth inequality increases because the rate of return on capital, R, is higher than the rate of economic growth.
The RG dynamic means that if you simply hold capital, your wealth grows faster than the average worker's wage. The focus shifts entirely from innovating and producing new goods to extracting rent from existing assets. The ethos becomes proprietorial owning assets that generate fees, rather than entrepreneurial, which is creating value through effort.
And when we talk about rent, we mean much more than just the monthly payment for an apartment, right?
Oh, absolutely. Rent, in this context, refers to the fee commanded by monopoly control over any asset. This includes financial instruments, digital platforms like Google or Facebook that act as necessary gatekeepers, and crucially, intellectual property protected by increasingly long and stringent laws.
The entire system is re-engineered to facilitate wealth accumulation just by being positioned to charge a fee.
A fee for access or use of a proprietary asset.
Yes. And this extraction mechanism, it merges seamlessly with the political sphere. This is the strategy of upward redistribution via political means.
Yes. The wealthy realize that competing in the market is harder and less profitable than changing the rules of the market itself. They use what's called extra economic power lobbying, regulatory capture, political donations to gain special privileges that directly yield wealth.
What kind of privileges?
Robert Brenner detailed these political strategies, seeking massive tax cuts, privatization of state assets at discounted prices, the failure to enforce anti-monopoly laws, which allows monopolies to flourish, and perhaps most significantly, the wealthy collecting interest payments on government debt that was accumulated under fiscal dominance.
So the accumulation strategy is fundamentally political.
It marks a complete merger of the economic and the political, just as it was in feudal times where power and wealth were inseparable.
And this restructuring directly fuels the rise of the service-servant economy and the massive erosion of class mobility.
Of course. When asset inflation is driven by central bank policy, a programmer or a nurse, even with a strong wage, simply cannot keep pace with the accumulation rate of the asset holder. Wealth distribution becomes determined by position, your proximity to the fiscal injection chain and the managerial class, not by your production value.
And this gives rise to the growth of the servant class.
Precisely. We are seeing a massive proportional growth in the service sector, where more and more workers are employed specifically as servants. Cleaners, personal care aides, gig drivers, delivery people. Their primary function is to service the comfort and convenience requirements of the affluent class.
The quote from the sources captures this starkly. There's a lot of people who are there to serve the comfort and convenience and care of affluent individuals.
It feels regressive, doesn't it? Labor no longer feels like a collective effort toward progress. It feels like it's primarily servicing the consumption needs of a privileged few.
And this regression is why the language of serfdom has returned, even for credentialed workers. It captures the psychological sense of being perpetually trapped.
The psychological reality is profound. Your personal property, your phone, your car, your home, increasingly loses its character as personal property. It's converted into an instrument of labor, tethered to a digital platform or a mortgage you can't escape, primarily serving the accumulation of the platform owners.
It's all part of the mechanism.
Yes, and the deliberate defunding of public education and the crushing student debt that pushes graduates into decades of repayment are essential parts of this. Neo-feudalism, structurally, does not need a large, economically secure, upwardly mobile middle class, so the pathways for advancement are actively hindered.
This brings us to Marcus, the Seattle data scientist. He holds a high-value degree, he's performing skilled labor, yet he perfectly captures this feeling of managed decline.
Marcus's story is a profound summation of all three parts of our dive. He's a young man in Seattle with a master's in data science, a highly credentialed worker. Yet he described his life not as striving to get ahead, but as a managed decline.
Just trying to slow the slide.
Exactly. He is working 40 hours a week, and his energy, his time, is primarily consumed by servicing sovereign debt and paying utility fees that have been inflated by complex tax mandates, the very green transition levies that laid off the engineer in the bistro.
So he feels that the social contract, the promise that hard work yields a better life, has been unilaterally rewritten without his consent.
It's the theft of labor value applied to a credentialed worker. He's productive, skilled, and educated, yet he experiences the same structural dilution of his time as the waiter. This profound sense of betrayal arises because the fundamental implicit promises underlying the social contract have been unilaterally abandoned by the state.
And those two promises, currency value protection and physical safety, are the absolute bedrock of stable governance.
They are. The state promised to protect the currency's purchasing power, meaning that the effort you put in today will retain its value tomorrow. Central banks have engaged in an incremental degradation of this commitment.
How so?
They move from strict inflation targeting to flexible adjustment, admitting that temporary high inflation is the new normal. This was a systemic, self-admitted retreat from preserving the value of the currency, making the labor stored by citizens secondary to fiscal accommodation.
And the second promise, public safety, has also visibly eroded in many major urban centers.
Yes. The failure to maintain basic public safety, evidenced by surges in property crime and violence in major cities, often correlated with soft enforcement policies like canceled bail or not prosecuting misdemeanors, further signals that the state's priority has shifted away from the practical needs of the citizenry.
When the state fails its most basic function of providing safety and public order, the breach of trust is total.
It is.
And when citizens witness elite institutions, whether it's the financial system, the educational system, or the enforcement arms betraying common sense, replacing professionalism with ideology and corrupting language, it breeds a specific social psychology. The sources call it the political exile mentality.
These individuals aren't necessarily physical migrants, but they are cognitive exiles. They observe the complete abandonment of rational discourse and objective standards, and this results in a deep, justifiable anger against a managerial class that seems either incompetent or actively disinterested in maintaining functional systems.
So their sense of high noble betrayal is not self-pity.
No, it's a rational response to seeing the world governed by a group who prioritize process and compliance over objective reality and results.
Okay, we've broken down this pathology into two fundamental forces: the economic architecture, fiscal dominance, and the Cantillon effect, systematically transferring middle-class wealth. And the institutional decay, the competence crisis, and neo-feudal extraction eroding the integrity and safety of our systems. So if this structural decline is the new reality, what does that mean for the listener who is trying to plan their life?
It means that the defensive response must be framed as realism, not pessimism. This structural decline is characterized by an exponential increase in friction, costs, regulatory compliance, ideological mandates, policy volatility. So the first step toward survival is abandoning illusions.
Illusions.
We have to let go of the expectation that central banks will spontaneously restore price stability, that governments will restore fiscal discipline, or that universities will restore intellectual honesty. That expectation offers loyalty to a system that has fundamentally changed its mission.
So the strategy shifts towards self-reliance and the building of parallel structures. Is that the idea? A defense against the managed decline.
Precisely. Survival shifts toward two key areas. First, hard asset allocation. Hard currency assets like gold, Bitcoin, or quality real estate in stable jurisdictions, they aren't merely speculative investments anymore. They are insurance against the systematic, guaranteed devaluation of fiat currency under fiscal dominance. They are tools to hedge against the theft of labor value.
And the rise of parallel institutions is a rational response to institutional decay.
Absolutely. When the state fails to provide basic security or value preservation or honest education, things like private arbitration, alternative education networks focus strictly on objective competence and results, and localized private security services become rational substitutes.
You're just trying to get away from the friction.
This entire structural decline is defined by that increasing friction. Every decision must run a gauntlet of political metrics, compliance demands, and unpredictable policy shifts. This is the permanent injury to systemic efficiency, the very essence of structural decay that you are fighting to escape.
So the choice is not between a boom and a recession, but between participating in the collective illusion, pretending that transition and resilience will seamlessly lead to a brighter future, or acknowledging that the old world is rotting and in the darkness, choosing to defend cognitive sovereignty and objective standards, awaiting the moment for rational reconstruction. The first step toward healing is to stop offering loyalty to the physician who caused the disease.